Hey guys, let's see. All right, today is our last political revolution. So we have already talked about the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and today we will finish with Latin American revolutions. So when we are finished with this, as you know, we have our first full-length DBQ this Thursday and Friday coming up. So make sure you ask those questions. You'll have some in-class work regarding those DBQs today. So let's get that done. And when we get back from Thanksgiving break, we will start a whole other kind of revolution. And I'll talk about that at the end of class today. So let's go ahead and finish up with our revolutions, okay? So still in period 3, 1750 to 1900. We are on unit 4. Ignore this. I just copied and pasted something incorrectly. We'll have a warm-up today. Name that revolution, which I won't make you do because you're watching a video. And then we'll get into the lecture, which is Latin American revolutions. Okay. If you're missing class, please go ahead and email me to get you the work that you've missed. Okay. So start with some memes. Yeah, Haitian Revolution. All right. It's a very solid meme. All right, guys. Look, I'm going to show you guys this cycle yet again. But you know, I'm not going to talk about it. I won't waste that much extra time, but please make sure you understand the cycles of revolution, the 8 steps, and then the repeat of the cycles. And basically, the only one of the revolutions that we're talking about in this class that was able to escape these cycles of revolution was the American Revolution. We said the French Revolution does not escape the cycles of revolution. The Haitian Revolution does not. Okay, Latin American does not. Okay, remember, revolutions start with that Enlightenment ideas, people sitting around in coffee shops talking about natural rights, equality. Eventually, they're going to have to ask the lower classes to assist them, and they're going to promise social and economic reform and then not give it to them. Okay, after the leader is overthrown, lower classes are eventually going to be a little pissed off at this. Eventually, it's going to turn into a radical, dangerous phase that will result in a military leader taking over. And this is going to happen in France. It's going to happen in Haiti. It's going to happen in Brazil. It's going to happen in Argentina. Plenty of other places that undergo cycles of revolution. So you don't have to memorize every single cycle, but you do have to understand who overcomes cycles of revolution and who doesn't, and what these mean, okay? So, for my in-person kids, or for my in-person in terms of who's coming to class, we'll do name that revolution. I won't make y'all do that for the video though. So, as I said to you guys, today is our last political revolution. Yay! Down with the man, down with the governments. But it's not the end of our revolutions, okay? We are going to talk about one in particular. It will take us pretty much the rest of December to talk about, and that will be the Industrial Revolution, okay? But up till now, we have seen kind of a theme in everything that we've discussed. All right, we've discussed the 13 colonies overthrowing the British tyranny. We've discussed the French peasants overthrowing the French king, okay? The reign of terror that ensued. We've discussed the Haitian Revolution, okay? The theme of this unit thus far is this. The colonies that Europe established in period 2, so 1450 to 1750, are basically all going to win their independence, okay? So again, the 13 colonies, Canada, Caribbean states, and then all of Latin America. So all of these colonies that will be established by Spain, by Britain, France, they're all going to win their independence, okay? So yay. So let's talk about Latin American independence. Now, you guys probably know Latin America is kind of that really big geographical term that encompasses all the way from just south of the Texas border all the way down to Argentina. So you've got Mexico, Central America, and then South America. Okay, so you probably remember that in period 2, Latin America, because of the Treaty of Tordesillas, Latin America was pretty much solely owned by the Spanish, except for Brazil, which, as we said, because of the nature of the Pope drawing the line inappropriately, Brazil goes to the Portuguese. So keep this in mind throughout this lecture. So here's what's going to happen in general. Remember the social hierarchy in period 2. You had that Spanish social hierarchy where you had the peninsulares at the top. So the people that were actually from Spain were at the top. But over time, more and more people called the Creoles are going to have more and more power, right? Less people born in Spain will be going to Latin America. So instead you'll have the Creoles, which are those mix between Spanish blood and Indian blood, having more and more power. Okay, so the Creoles are going to start looking for more and more political power, and Spain and Brazil, or Spain and Portugal are not going to want to grant it. Okay, so the Creoles want this political power, and they're going to be inspired by the ideas of the Enlightenment. So natural rights, equality for all right, the rejection of absolutism. Okay. They're also going to be inspired by the American Revolution. So the American Revolution overthrows the British king. It's successful, okay? And the big thing that you'll see in Latin America is the rejection of mercantilism. So remember, in period 2, Spain is going to heavily extract resources from Latin America. We said they'll exploit silver from from those mines in the Andes in Latin America, in Bolivia in particular, and Potosi. They'll be exploiting sugar. They'll be exploiting all those crops from the Columbian Exchange. Okay, and the Latin American states are not going to benefit from this mercantilist system. Okay, the only person who will benefit is the mother country. Therefore, only Spain and Portugal are really going to benefit. Okay. So in essence, these Latin American independence movements will be over the ideas of the Enlightenment, which we've talked about over and over again, the success of the American Revolution, and the outright rejection of mercantilism, okay? Now, the most famous leader of these Latin American independence movements was this guy right here, Simon Bolivar, okay? Pretty handsome fellow, had a little bit of a receding hairline, but we can forgive that. Bolivar was extremely anti-mercantilism, okay? We're going to look at one of his documents in just a second. He outright rejected mercantilism, okay? Now, he also wanted to create a United States of South America. So he wanted all of those colonies in South America to create a similar system to what the 13 colonies had, okay? And rejecting mercantilism. So he wanted all those United States of South America to be able to trade amongst themselves. And so everyone would benefit, okay? So essentially in 1800, all right, this is what Latin America is going to look like. And as you can see, guys, Spain is going to have all of this green land. The Treaty of Tordesillas is still going to have, Brazil is going to be Portuguese. You'll also have some weirdly Dutch and French colonies here, but you don't have to worry about that. So essentially what's going to happen, that Napoleon, as we remember, the military leader from France, is going to invade Portugal and Spain. So during that invasion, the Spanish and Portuguese don't really have ultimate power over their colonies in Latin America. And so what will eventually happen is that by 1840, most of Latin America will overthrow Spanish and Portuguese rule. And they will split into smaller states that will eventually start to fight each other. Okay, unfortunately, Simon Bolivar's grand view of all these states kind of being one United States of South America never really comes to fruition. So instead, you're going to have little states, Colombia, Argentina, Peru, Ecuador, all this stuff. They will be fighting amongst each other instead of, being sort of one connected United States of South America. And they're going to go from being engaging in this mercantilist system with Spain and Portugal to trying to trade with other places, but unfortunately they're kind of more distracted by fighting each other. So what you'll see, unfortunately, is that once they're able to kind of overcome, this picture is super weird. I did not see this guy's face until now. What? Look at that mustache. Look at those chops. Dang. Okay. Anyway, so what you're going to see is that Latin America eventually will pretty much overthrow most of Spain and Portugal. And again, most of this is because Spain and Portugal were distracted by kind of trying to keep themselves afloat after Napoleon comes and invades them and takes over their lands. So they're going to get their own states. And what will eventually happen is that mostly these Latin American states will form their own states. And instead of becoming this United States of South America, they'll start to fight each other instead. And they're going to enter into these cycles of revolution. Okay. So a lot of that is because the Creoles were pretty high up in society. And of course, when they overthrew the Spanish, they offered that social and political and economic change to the lower classes, the mestizos and the enslaved people. They offered them these things, and then they did not guarantee them. They did not allow them to happen. So what you'll see are these revolutions continuing to kind of go through all of these areas. So you'll see Argentina will probably not break their cycle until the 1980s. Bolivia, in many ways, is still in their revolution. Okay, lots and lots of these Latin American states, because of the fact that they never actually came through with the promises they made to these lower classes, they're never really able to overcome these cycles. Okay. And that's in a lot of ways why there's so much turmoil in South America right now. Okay. So, the fine people at College Board love to make us require us to teach certain things. And one of the things they want us to teach you guys is something called the Jamaica Letter. Now, the Jamaica Letter was a letter written by Simon Bolivar. And he's going to write this letter while he is in Jamaica. So Jamaica is a British colony. And Simon Bolivar actually, remember, the British don't have absolutism. So Simon Bolivar is writing it there, and he actually wants British support. But it is a revolutionary document. And when you read it, you can see that it's inspired by the ideas of the Enlightenment, okay, natural rights, equality for all. It's also a outright rejection of mercantilism. And in this Jamaica letter, you see Bolivar talking about his dream or his ideas for a United States of South America. So guys, in the letter, he rejects mercantilism. Okay, as we said, the Spanish and Portuguese in period 2, their mercantilism over South America, in which they extracted resources and raw materials, brought it to the mother country, and then sold it back for a higher price to only benefit themselves. Bolivar rejects this, okay? And he says that mercantilism is always a cause of Latin American revolutions, okay? People don't want to be exploited this way. People want to be able to trade. They want to be able to kind of create their own economic system, okay? The idea that we can only trade with one country, this mother country, this so-called mother country, is garbage, okay? Latin American states despise this. Okay, if you are, a Bolivian or Peruvian extracting silver, and you want to be able to fetch the highest price for that, sending it to the mother country and only the mother country will not fetch you the highest price for that. Okay, so in a lot of ways, Bolivar is just completely rejecting mercantilism. He's saying that it is terrible for Latin America and it needs to go, and the Spanish and the Portuguese need to go with it. Okay. And again, he also claims that they want to create this American style system based on the ideas of the Enlightenment, okay? They want to create this United States of Latin America, where Bolivia and Peru and Argentina and Brazil, all these countries are connected and are trading with each other and not having to trade with just one country, either Spain or Portugal, okay? The rejection of mercantilism and the adoption of a United States of Latin America sort of system. But Simon Bolivar is really important, but he is an Enlightenment figure, okay? And so like most Enlightenment figures, especially when you look at the figures from the step one in our cycles of revolution, did they actually mean equality for all? Did they actually mean the rejection of mercantilism so that, you know, everyone could benefit? Probably not. Okay, Bolivar probably meant just for himself and for the Creoles, not necessarily for the enslaved people or the mestizos, people that lower in that social hierarchy in Latin America. So, you know, the Jamaica Letter is very important in its rejection of mercantilism, but on the other hand, it probably doesn't go far enough. Like most of these revolutions that we've seen, there's these sort of promises to these lower classes to give equality for all, to give political change, to social change, economic change. But in reality, does it actually mean that? Probably not. So I just wanted you guys to take a look. In previous years, the Jamaica Letter was actually given to students and they were asked to identify what it was. We don't have to look at the Jamaica Letter word for word, but again, you do need to know that the Jamaica Letter is important in that it rejects mercantilism and it really wants this United States of Latin America. So I'm giving you two examples here, and I'll give you a minute to read it. But yeah, you can see that this is his terminology and this outright rejection of mercantilism. All right, let me give you another quote. Yeah, I mean, he's talking about these raw goods that, you know, can be extracted from Latin America but not being used for to build the economic system of Latin America. So again, if you see this on your AP World test in May, you know that it's Simon Bolivar, you know it's a Jamaica Letter, and you know that it's a rejection of mercantilism, and you know that it's for the United States of Latin America. Okay? Okay, so I only need to teach you about one of these Latin American independence movements. And so the one that I think is probably the most interesting is the Brazilian independence, and it occurs in 1822. Okay, and one of the reasons it's sort of unique is that it's the only independence movement in Latin America that's not against the Spanish. So, as we remember from period two, because of the Treaty of Tordesillas, Brazil is a colony of the Portuguese. Okay, and so even today they speak Portuguese. So, keep that in mind while we continue talking about them. And yes, this guy is very funny looking, but I will talk about him in a second. So let's think back. French Revolution is happening. Napoleon seizes power, military power, and he decides to basically go and conquer Europe. And, you know, the Portuguese king heroically says to his people, you know, we will fight every last man and woman against Napoleon. And then he gets on a boat and sails to Brazil to hide. So not really heroic. But yes, the Portuguese king actually, once Napoleon invaded Portugal, the Portuguese king got on a boat and sailed to Brazil to hide from Napoleon, because of course. So the Portuguese king is going to hide out in Brazil for some years, and he's even going to raise his son, Dom Pedro, so this guy right here, in Brazil. Okay. So after Napoleon is defeated, the Portuguese king will go back to Portugal, and he's going to leave his son, Dom Pedro, behind in Brazil. Okay. So, you know, in the 1820s, it's starting to become obvious that, you know, these Enlightenment ideas of revolution are spreading. And the Creoles in Brazil, so remember the upper class people in that social hierarchy, they're starting to realize that they want to get rid of this mercantilist system. All right. They want to make their own forms of money. They don't want to be ruled by a Portuguese king anymore. But remember, guys, when it's the top of the social institution, normally in order to be successful, you have to recruit the lower classes, remember? But in the Brazilian independence movement, they don't actually do that. So the Creoles are going to go ahead and declare independence from Portugal. And what they're going to do is they're actually going to declare independence under the Portuguese king's son. Super weird, but yes, Dom Pedro, again, the Portuguese, who would have been the Portuguese king one day down the line, is sort of made the king of the Brazilian independence movement. And he's, Dom Pedro is declared Emperor Pedro I, and the Creoles install him to power. Now, there's some mild fighting, but frankly, the Portuguese just don't have the resources or capability to forcefully keep Brazil. So for the most part, Portugal's just kind of gonna let Brazil go. It's not gonna be that huge, awful fight, this bloody, awful fight. And in many ways, the Creoles, again, the top of that social hierarchy, managed to gain independence without having to recruit the lower classes. So because they didn't have to recruit the lower classes, they really didn't have to do those sort of empty promises of social and economic and political change, okay? So you'd think that this would be a very successful revolution. Seems a little boring, in fact. But because the Creoles did not recruit the lower classes to assist them in overthrowing the Portuguese mercantilistic system, they started to have their own little factions of fighting, and they started to turn on each other. So the Creoles are going to actually overthrow Emperor Pedro I in 1829. And poor little fella has to get on a boat and go back to Portugal and cry to daddy that he lost his own colony. That's a different story. But these Creole factions are going to turn on each other, okay? And what could have been a very successful revolution wasn't, because these factions are fighting each other. And so some of these factions start to appeal to the lower classes for support. And this is going to pull Brazil into this cyclical revolutionary turn. Okay. Now, let me emphasize again that the Creoles never really had to recruit the lower classes to assist them in overthrowing the Portuguese. And it was only really until the Creoles were fighting in these small factions that they got lower classes involved. But they never kind of, fell down to the level of inviting enslaved peoples to assist them. And this is important because, as you probably remember from period 2, guys, Brazil is the first state to bring enslaved people into the colony. All right, remember, they needed those people, they needed cheap labor to extract sugar. They will also be the last Latin American state to free their slaves in 1888. And that is also because they did not promise these lower class, they did not promise enslaved people freedom, okay? They didn't need to. They were able to overthrow the Portuguese without having to swoop to the level of asking the lowest of the lowest classes for assistance, okay? So they're the first to have enslavement, and they're the last to get rid of it. And there's actually a really interesting sort of side note that, so think about it like this. The United States gets rid of slavery in 1865, and Brazil gets rid of it in 1888. But interestingly enough, after the American Civil War, a lot of slave owners from America actually moved to Brazil in order to keep their slavery system. Okay, so there's actually something called the Confederados, where you don't have to write this down, but I think it's interesting. There's a considerable population even today of Brazil of ex-American Southerners who, after the Civil War, moved their slave population to Brazil in order to keep slavery alive, I guess. But 20 years later, slavery will eventually fall in Brazil as well. And speaking of slave revolts, there's something that's really interesting happening in Brazil that I wanted to tell you guys about. Something called the Mali Revolt. Now, I know that most of us have when I've talked to you guys about, in period 2 especially, all Christianity coming into the New World, I sort of kind of maybe led you to believe that it was only Christianity coming into the New World, or sort of those African syncretic religions. Actually, Islam actually comes into the New World too, and it comes from the enslaved peoples. So in 1833, there's going to be a slave revolt called the Malay Revolt. And it's a very interesting revolt, although let me just go ahead and say that it was not a success. But you can, when you guys looked at those maps that showed you the arrows from West Africa coming into the New World, there was some arrows that from certain parts of Africa where there was a huge percentage of Muslims. So Brazil actually got a large percentage of enslaved people that actually practiced Islam. And that's important to this story. So in 1833, a group of enslaved peoples who practiced both Islam and also was kind of the same ethnicity, kind of coming from the same region in West Africa. They're going to revolt against the slave system. Okay. Now remember, Brazil has the highest percentage of slaves in the New World. Okay. Well, I guess the second highest after Haiti. And so, this is a very brutal slave regime because they're having to keep this huge percentage of enslaved people, under lock and key, basically, so that they don't revolt. Okay, but the Malay Revolt in 1833, a group of Muslim and same ethnic enslaved people revolt against the slave system. And it should have been a success, okay? It should have been a success because if every enslaved person in Brazil revolted, they would have been extremely successful. However, slaves from other ethnic groups did not join them. Okay, at this point, slavery is extremely complicated. And at this point, some slaves don't want to participate in a slave revolt with Muslims. It's not that they would have participated in a slave revolt with Christians, it's just that at this point, slavery is extremely, extremely complicated. And what should have been a very successful revolt was not, because other slaves did not want to revolt with Muslims. They did not want to revolt with enslaved people of this particular West African ethnic group. Okay. And at this point, some enslaved people had actually gained freedom and they didn't want to participate in this slave revolt because they were free themselves. Okay. So make sure you understand that slavery is a very complicated institution, and it's very, very complicated in Brazil simply because it's been in Brazil longer than other places in the New World. It starts there and it finishes there. It's the longest amount of slavery on this transatlantic slave route is in Brazil. Okay, and again, what should have been a successful revolt along the lines of maybe the Haitian Revolution, the Malay Revolt, was not successful because it was run by Muslims. And at this point, slaves were not willing to fight alongside of Muslims. Okay. So guys, that is the end of our political revolutions. So yay! Although there's still plenty of other political revolutions. And in fact, if you are interested, I highly recommend reading the Wikipedia article on the Mexican revolutions. Very interesting stuff. Okay. But we will have our DBQ on Thursday and Friday. So make sure you leave my class feeling prepared for that because DBQs are tough. Okay. And after that, you'll have a nice long Thanksgiving break. And when we get back, we will talk about another sort of revolution, not a political one, but an industrial one. Okay. So I will see you all later.